At your level, Elias, adaptability matters. That was the exact sentence Gareth Thornton used right before Human Resources revoked my system credentials and confiscated my corporate laptop. Thursday, 4:28 p.m. I remember the exact time because I looked at the digital clock mounted behind Nadia Thorne's shoulder 3 separate times, trying to comprehend the surreal nightmare unfolding before me. Less than 16 hours earlier, I had been loading fishing gear and luggage into the trunk of my SUV for a peaceful lake trip with my wife Clara and our daughter Chloe. It was the first genuine family vacation we had managed to schedule in 9 long years. Then I was summoned into conference room B on the 4th floor. The conference room was uncomfortably freezing, possessing that sharp, sterile air conditioning chill that corporate offices reserve for confidential meetings where unpleasant decisions are finalized quietly. Nadia Thorne from Human Resources sat at the far end of the long mahogany table with a printed manila folder already opened. Gareth Thornton, our Executive Vice President of Operations, sat beside her wearing that practiced, unbothered executive posture I had seen him deploy during previous corporate restructurings. Standing silently near the doorway was an unfamiliar guard in a dark uniform. Security. That was the precise moment my stomach dropped into a cold pit. My name is Elias Vance. I am 49 years old, and, until that Thursday afternoon, I served as the Senior Operations Integration Director at Vanguard Freight Solutions. 19 years with the company, earning $185,000 annually, and apparently my entire career was being erased in under 8 minutes. Gareth folded his hands neatly over his gold pen. We are making strategic organizational adjustments to better align with the future digital roadmap of the enterprise, he declared with a practiced lack of emotion. I stared at him in utter disbelief. 7 years earlier, I had personally spent 3 straight weeks training Gareth on our proprietary routing algorithms when he first transferred from corporate finance. Back then, he could not distinguish between a database latency spike and a physical warehouse dispatch error. Now he was addressing me like an obsolete piece of hardware that needed to be decommissioned without delay. Nadia Thorne slid a stapled severance agreement across the polished table without making direct eye contact. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately, she said in a rehearsed tone. Not next month, not after a structured handover period, but immediately. I actually let out a short, hollow laugh because the absurdity felt overwhelming. You are terminating me less than 24 hours before my scheduled vacation, after 19 years of continuous service. Gareth offered a tiny, practiced nod of artificial empathy. This is strictly a business calculation, Elias. It is not personal. That phrase in corporate culture always signifies the absolute opposite of truth. I pressed my palms against the cool table. What happens to the critical infrastructure transition for Atlas Global Manufacturing? I asked. Atlas was our flagship client, accounting for 42% of our annual shipping revenue across North America. Gareth adjusted his expensive cufflinks smoothly. Julian Brody will assume oversight of digital logistics operations moving forward, he replied without hesitation. Julian Brody was 33 years old, possessed a newly minted Master of Business Administration degree, wore tailored suits, and spoke fluent corporate jargon. He talked about freight infrastructure as if it were a static deck of slides rather than living, volatile code managing nationwide supply chains. Julian had never managed an active server crash or a physical logistics failure in his life, but senior leadership adored him because he moved quickly, cut costs aggressively, and presented beautifully in executive boardrooms. Gareth leaned back in his leather chair. The enterprise requires forward-thinking leadership aligned with modern scalability targets, he stated firmly. Modern scalability targets. I had spent 19 years rectifying catastrophic operational mistakes, born from executives throwing around phrases of that nature. I glanced down at the severance agreement on the table. The small print demanded a complete waiver of claims under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act and an immediate non-disclosure commitment. My mind raced through our household expenses. The mortgage payment due next Tuesday, Chloe's university tuition balance, Clara's outstanding medical bills from her shoulder surgery last winter, and the non-refundable cabin deposit I had paid 6 months ago because my family was worried I was burning myself out. Furthermore, I knew the legal implications of what Vanguard was doing. Under federal guidelines governing corporate restructuring, executing sudden, targeted terminations of long-tenured employees while avoiding broader public notice can trigger significant liabilities. The statutory notice provisions under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act require companies to provide 60 days of advance written notice before initiating mass layoffs or substantial job cuts. By mischaracterizing my dismissal as an isolated position elimination, management was attempting to bypass federal notice requirements while quietly restructuring the technical department behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Gareth kept talking in that measured, soothing tone executives use when they want cold behavior to sound visionary. Senior staff sometimes struggle to adapt to evolving operational velocity, he added. That remark stung deeper than the termination itself. I knew what those words really meant. Too experienced, too vocal about operational risks, too expensive and impossible to intimidate into taking dangerous shortcuts. Nadia finally spoke up. Your system credentials and administrative access have already been revoked. The decision had been finalized before I even set foot inside the administrative building. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my security access keycard, and laid it quietly beside the folder. Nobody said a word. That heavy silence spoke louder than their formal scripts. Gareth refused to look me in the eye. Nadia began organizing her paperwork into neat stacks, while the security guard shifted his weight near the exit door. The entire interaction felt carefully rehearsed, as though they had practiced removing me without causing a disturbance. I spent the next 20 minutes packing 19 years of my life into 2 cardboard boxes while younger project managers averted their eyes. One analytics coordinator actively turned into a break room when he saw security walking beside me. That reaction lingered far longer than the shock of losing my job. It was not anger I felt, but a deep sense of humiliation. 19 years of maintaining the infrastructure that kept this company profitable, and suddenly people treated me as if I were contagious. The humid afternoon air hit me like a wall when I walked out of the glass lobby. I placed the boxes carefully in the back seat of my truck. As I settled into the driver's seat, my personal phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Lyle Henderson, Chief Operating Officer at Atlas Global Manufacturing. Elias, are we still confirmed for Tuesday morning's nationwide routing optimization review? I stared at the bright screen for a long moment as realization dawned on me. Vanguard leadership had not informed our largest client that the architect of their entire logistics network had just been fired, and that omission was a massive, dangerous error on their part. The drive home took nearly an hour through heavy afternoon traffic, but the time passed in a haze of disbelief. I kept staring through the windshield, trying to comprehend how 19 years of dedication could be wiped out in 8 cold minutes. Vanguard Freight Solutions managed real-time supply chain distribution for major manufacturing enterprises across North America. To the general public, our name was invisible, which meant our operations were running smoothly. Our custom software tracked freight movements, synchronized multi-state distribution hubs, and balanced inventory queues across thousands of miles. When our code worked, factories operated seamlessly. When it failed, entire assembly lines ceased operation within hours. I learned that lesson the hard way back in 2013 during the first major Atlas network crisis. A regional routing node failed outside of Indianapolis during peak holiday shipping. Dispatch signals jammed, orders duplicated by the thousands, and freight trucks were sent to wrong facilities across 5 states. Vanguard executives panicked immediately, hiding inside executive suites while managers blamed software vendors and vendors blamed hardware technicians. I stayed awake for 3 consecutive days in an unheated warehouse office, drinking lukewarm coffee and manually rebuilding corrupted operational logic from scratch. That was where I created our proprietary emergency balancing algorithms. Under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106, proprietary code architecture, and custom recovery scripts created under specific internal parameters remain protected intellectual property. Yet the actual execution knowledge of how those complex scripts interact under pressure resided exclusively inside my memory. I never documented the manual failover sequences because management repeatedly denied budget requests for dedicated technical documentation staff. Every time I submitted a proposal for operational redundancy, Gareth Thornton rejected it, labeling it an unnecessary expenditure that failed to align with operational velocity. That cold warehouse in Indianapolis was also where I first built a solid professional relationship with Lyle Henderson. Lyle was a straightforward executive who despised corporate posturing and valued people who solved critical problems when everything was on the line. We worked side by side through that nightmare, and from that week onward, Atlas trusted me implicitly. Not Vanguard corporate leadership, but me personally. Over the next decade, I became the individual. Everyone called at 2 in the morning to receive mice alerts, severe winter storms, and server crashes. I never resented the demanding work. What pained me was watching practical experience gradually transformed into a perceived liability by corporate leadership. Around 5 years ago, the corporate culture inside Vanguard underwent a fundamental transformation. Executive management shifted focus from operational reliability to financial engineering and investor optics. Polished business terminology replaced genuine technical competence. Gareth Thornton became the poster child for this new era, utilizing slick presentations to sell confidence to board members who had never seen a warehouse floor. Then Julian Brody was hired. Julian treated complex industrial infrastructure like theoretical business school case studies. He viewed safeguards as obstacles to rapid expansion, which terrified me because physical supply chains do not bend to executive optimism. For 2 years, I repeatedly filed formal technical warnings regarding the aggressive shortcuts Julian's onboarding teams were implementing to accelerate client growth. They were bypassing critical verification protocols and removing automated failover checks to speed up system integration. Whenever I raised these concerns in leadership meetings, Gareth dismissed my warnings. Elias always fixates on worst-case scenarios, he would say with a polite laugh. But anticipating worst-case scenarios was precisely what kept our clients from suffering catastrophic downtime. 6 months prior to my firing, Julian remarked in a committee meeting that Elias operates like it is still 2009. A few young managers laughed. I remained silent, knowing that 3 weeks earlier I had silently corrected a routing error that would have cost Atlas over $500,000 in delivery penalties. But corporate culture rarely rewards disasters that are quietly prevented. When I pulled into my driveway Thursday evening, the sun was sinking behind the trees. I sat inside my truck for several minutes before walking inside. A sobering reality struck me with full force. The custom balancing triggers for Atlas, the undocumented manual overrides during high-volume spikes, and the emergency failover pathways existed only in my head. Vanguard had just severed the only engineer capable of keeping their primary client's network stable. I awoke Friday morning at 5:38 a.m. out of long-standing habit. For a brief instant, I forgot the events of the previous day. Then I saw my ironed work clothes hanging on the bedroom chair, prepared for the airport commute we were supposed to make later that afternoon, and everything rushed back. The cold conference room, the paper folder, the security guard, and Gareth's condescending voice. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. It was not panic, but something far colder. A profound realization of how disposable 19 years of loyalty truly were in corporate eyes. Clara was awake beside me, reading on her tablet. When she looked over, her expression softened with deep concern. "Elias, you look pale," she said quietly. I tried to tell her I was handling it, but the facade crumbled immediately. By 6:15 a.m., we were sitting at the kitchen table with the severance documents spread out between us. Clara listened intently as I explained everything, detail by detail. Gareth, Nadia, Julian Brody, and the security guard escorting me out. I anticipated she might express anger toward the company, but instead she looked exhausted. The weary look of a spouse who had watched her husband sacrifice family milestones for a company that ultimately discarded him. "You gave them 19 years, Elias," she said softly, taking my hand. "You missed birthdays, canceled family trips, and took emergency calls during our anniversary dinners. and they treated you like an unwanted expense. Her words resonated deeply because they were entirely accurate. I had sacrificed precious time with Clara and Chloe under the naive impression that dedication built job security. By mid-morning Friday, my personal cell phone began ringing continuously. The first calls came from junior systems analysts asking where emergency configuration keys were archived. Then Owen Miller, a senior engineer who had worked under me for 6 years, called directly. "Elias, where did you archive the contingency balance scripts for the Atlas distribution nodes?" Owen asked, his voice laced with anxiety. "They are not in the central repository." I took a slow breath. "They were never uploaded to the central repository, Owen," I replied calmly. Gareth denied budget authorization for redundant documentation 3 separate times. He classified it as non-essential operational overhead. Silence hung on the line. Owen understood immediately what that meant. Without those manual balance scripts, any sudden volume surge in Atlas's network would cause a routing bottleneck that junior engineers could not resolve. Throughout Friday afternoon, I deliberately avoided checking my phone, attempting to focus on packing for our trip to the lake. A part of me wanted to help Owen and the junior technical team. For 19 years, my immediate reaction to any technical trouble was to jump in and solve it before damage occurred. But every time I felt the urge to respond to text messages, the image of Gareth Thornton sitting in that cold conference room returned to my mind, cold, detached, and arrogant, alongside Julian Brody standing near the corridor, pretending not to notice security walking me out. That memory hardened my resolve. I was not committing sabotage, nor was I deleting proprietary data. I was simply refusing to provide free labor to defend executives who had calculated that my experience was no longer worth maintaining. Late Friday afternoon, Clara and I packed the SUV and drove out to the lake cabin. It began raining heavily halfway through the drive. Dark roads, wipers beating steadily, while my phone vibrated repeatedly inside the glove compartment. I kept it muted. Around 11:38 p.m., while sitting by the cabin fireplace, a red notification flashed on an old monitoring application linked to Vanguard's operational node network. Network synchronization imbalance detected. Region 4. My stomach tightened automatically. I knew precisely what was happening. Julian's team had deployed an unverified automated script to handle weekend freight volumes, bypassing the manual balancing triggers I routinely adjusted. If nobody reconfigured the queue balances before Monday morning, the error would cascade across multiple distribution centers. I stared at the glowing red screen for a moment while rain lashed against the cabin window. Then I powered off the device, set it face down on the nightstand, and went to sleep peacefully. Monday morning arrived with 42 missed phone calls and 19 urgent voicemails waiting on my phone. The earliest calls had begun coming in at 4:15 a.m. Real operational disasters do not respect normal business hours. They strike in the dark when overwhelmed managers realize their theoretical models are collapsing in real time. The lake outside our cabin was serene, wrapped in a blanket of morning fog, but inside Vanguard's corporate headquarters, panic had clearly overtaken the building. I listened to a voicemail left by Gavin Ross, an overnight operations supervisor. "Elias, please call me the second you get this." Gavin's voice sounded panicked. "The entire Midwest distribution network for Atlas is locking up. Automated routing queues are generating duplicate freight manifests. Warehouses in 3 states are holding outbound trucks because the core system is misrouting destination codes. Julian's onboarding team tried forcing a system reset, but it wiped the custom gateway balances. We cannot stabilize the load." I closed my eyes and shook my head. It was the exact failure mode I had outlined in a formal memorandum 4 months earlier. Julian Brody's group had stripped out the manual failover checks to demonstrate faster system throughput to the board. Those checks were not automated for a reason. They required real-time human balancing based on fluctuating regional truck availability. I had explained this protocol repeatedly, but Gareth ignored my documentation because Julian promised lower operational costs before the upcoming quarterly investor call. Now, reality had arrived to collect the debt. At 8:24 a.m. Monday, my phone rang again. The caller identification displayed Gareth Thornton's direct office line. I allowed it to ring 4 times before answering. "Elias," Gareth said. His voice lacked its usual polished charm, carrying a strained, hurried edge. "Good morning, Gareth. How are things at the office?" I asked calmly. A brief pause followed. "We are experiencing some unexpected legacy infrastructure anomalies regarding the Atlas network integration," he said, attempting to sound in control. Legacy infrastructure anomalies, I thought. Executives always resort to vague corporate vocabulary when they are terrified. Gareth continued, speaking carefully. "We are attempting to recalibrate the system internally, but certain custom configuration files appear difficult to locate. We would like to bring you in on a temporary consulting basis for a few days to assist Julian's team in restoring network stability." I leaned back against the porch railing. "The people you retain should know where all critical architecture resides," I replied evenly. "After all, you told me my position was eliminated to align with modern scalability targets." Gareth lowered his voice, dropping the casual pretense. "Elias, this is an urgent corporate emergency. We are prepared to offer you an hourly consulting rate to resolve this gateway issue today. Furthermore, demonstrating a spirit of cooperation during this operational hitch would certainly reflect favorably on your final severance settlement terms legally." That remark was a grave mistake. Mentioning legal leverage confirmed that management realized the full scope of the disaster they had created. I responded with absolute clarity. "Gareth, let me be perfectly clear with you. You terminated my employment on Thursday at 4:28 p.m., revoked my system access, and had an armed guard escort me from the premises. In doing so, Vanguard likely violated statutory notice requirements under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act by executing stealth layoffs without proper lead time. Furthermore, attempting to coerce uncompensated technical labor by threatening my earned severance constitutes bad faith. I am currently out of state on vacation with my family. Do not contact me again." Garrett's voice hardened into anger. "This operational disruption could result in multi-million-dollar losses," he snapped. "Then you should have thought about operational stability before replacing 19 years of experience with slide presentations," I said, and hung up the phone. At 4:45 p.m. Monday, my phone rang again. This time it was Lyle Henderson calling directly from Atlas Global Manufacturing. "Elias, why were you not present on our emergency infrastructure escalation call this afternoon?" Lyle asked without preamble. His tone was dangerously calm. I took a deep breath. "Lyle, I was terminated by Vanguard leadership last Thursday afternoon," I replied simply. Long silence followed on the line. I heard papers shuffling in his office. "They terminated you right before our peak distribution cycle?" Lyle asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Yes, and who is currently managing our routing framework?" "Julian Brody's integration group," I answered truthfully. Lyle exhaled slowly. "That explains why their management team spent 2 hours making excuses while our assembly lines in Ohio were forced to idle. Thank you for your honesty, Elias. Our legal team is convening an emergency session with Vanguard executive leadership tonight." Former company, I thought. After hanging up, the tide was turning faster than I had anticipated. Tuesday morning did not arrive quietly. It erupted into a full-scale corporate crisis that Vanguard could no longer suppress. I woke up at 6:12 a.m. to find my phone flooded with industry alerts, news summaries, and private messages from former colleagues. Atlas Global Manufacturing had officially filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Vanguard Freight Solutions in federal court, alleging breach of contract, gross negligence, and breach of fiduciary duty. The filing requested an immediate court injunction and emergency access to audit Vanguard's internal infrastructure operational logs. By 9 o'clock that morning, the story was picked up by major logistics trade publications across the country. Regional distribution hubs across 4 states were backed up with misrouted freight. Manufacturing plants relying on Atlas components were facing impending line shutdowns due to delayed parts delivery. The financial exposure for Vanguard was escalating exponentially, with contractual delay penalties compounding at a rate of over $300,000 per day. Inside Vanguard headquarters, complete chaos reigned. Owen Miller sent me an encrypted message detailing the internal fallout. Gareth Thornton had convened emergency war room meetings every 2 hours, attempting to shift blame onto external cloud vendors and legacy database errors. However, His narrative dissolved when Owen and a group of senior engineers leaked a series of archived internal emails directly to the board of directors and Atlas's legal representatives. The leaked records were devastatingly clear. Over the preceding 9 months, I had submitted 6 detailed technical memos outlining the exact operational risks of Julian Brody's accelerated onboarding plan. In every instance, Gareth had formally rejected my recommendations, adding notes that my concerns reflected legacy operational thinking that failed to align with strategic growth targets. Even worse, internal system audit logs revealed that after my firing, someone on Julian's team had attempted to forge system authorization logs to make it appear as though the failing balancing scripts were legacy errors I had left unmaintained. This attempted cover-up exposed Vanguard to severe legal liabilities regarding corporate forgery and fraudulent misrepresentation. From an executive perspective, concealing known systemic risks from board members and major investors while misrepresenting system readiness to secure bonus payouts constitutes a direct breach of fiduciary duty. When board members reviewed the documented paper trail, they realized that the failure was not an unpredictable technical glitch, but the direct result of executive arrogance and deliberate disregard for established operational safeguards. During a joint technical audit call on Tuesday afternoon, Atlas's legal team demanded that Julian Brody explain the mathematical logic behind the failing queue balancing scripts. According to internal reports, Julian froze completely, unable to answer basic questions regarding database latency parameters or manual failover protocols. His polished presentation skills were useless when confronted with raw technical reality. At 3:35 p.m. Tuesday, Lyle Henderson called me a second time. "Elias, we have officially suspended our logistics contract with Vanguard Freight Solutions," Lyle announced. "We are invoking our contractual right to transition our routing management to an independent external oversight team." I listened quietly as he continued. "We want you to lead that independent technical team, Elias. We are offering you a direct retainer contract with Atlas to audit, rebuild, and manage our logistics infrastructure architecture directly." I sat at the wooden table in the cabin, looking out at the rain falling on the lake. For 19 years, I had labored under the belief that my professional worth was tied to a corporate title and the approval of executives like Gareth Thornton. Now, standing outside their failing system, I realized that true authority resided in genuine competence and technical integrity. "I accept, Lyle," I replied. "We will begin rebuilding the architecture on our terms." 2 months passed before the corporate fallout from the Vanguard collapse fully settled. System failures of that magnitude leave permanent marks on enterprise reputations. Vanguard Freight Solutions survived the legal crisis, but its standing in the industry was severely compromised. Atlas Global Manufacturing permanently canceled 60% of its shipping contracts with Vanguard, transitioning its core routing management entirely to my newly formed independent firm, Vance Systems Architecture Consultancy. An internal investigation commissioned by Vanguard's board of directors led to swift consequences for executive management. Gareth Thornton was stripped of his operational authority and placed on administrative leave before resigning in disgrace amid pending board inquiries into executive misrepresentation and potential age discrimination claims under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Internal auditors discovered that Gareth had systematically targeted long-tenured, higher-salaried technical directors for termination to artificially inflate short-term profit margins prior to executive bonus reviews. Julian Brody was quietly removed from digital operations leadership and reassigned to an administrative role in corporate strategy before leaving the firm a few weeks later. His rapid rise through corporate ranks ended the moment his theoretical models failed under real-world pressure. Vanguard's legal department moved quickly to settle my outstanding severance claims out of court to avoid a public wrongful termination and Warren Act lawsuit. The final settlement package included full severance compensation for 24 months, complete acceleration of my corporate stock options, and a formal written release from all non-compete restrictions. My consultancy flourished rapidly. Within 90 days of launching, three other major manufacturing companies that had witnessed the Atlas crisis reached out to retain our services. I hired Owen Miller and two other former Vanguard engineers who had grown tired of corporate politics. We established a firm grounded in technical excellence, clear documentation, and absolute operational transparency. We paid competitive salaries, respected work-life balance, and never sacrificed safety safeguards for quick executive optics. One crisp morning in late October, I drove into the city for a progress review meeting at Atlas's corporate headquarters. My route happened to take me past Vanguard's glass office tower. The building looked unchanged from the outside, its blue glass panels reflecting the morning sun, but to me, it no longer carried any sense of intimidation. I saw the side parking area where I used to park my truck every morning for 19 years, and the exit doors where security had escorted me out carrying two cardboard boxes. I felt no residual bitterness or anger as I drove past, only a deep, quiet sense of clarity. Executives often operate under the delusion that they can replace decades of specialized experience with buzzwords, offshore labor, and aggressive cost-cutting without consequence. They forget that complex systems are held together, not by executive titles or slide presentations, but by the dedicated, quiet work of experts who understand how things actually operate under pressure. When you remove the individuals who keep your foundation stable, you do not modernize your enterprise. You simply accelerate your own collapse. I adjusted my mirror, accelerated onto the highway toward my meeting with Lyle, and smiled. I was no longer a cog inside a corporate machine that took my dedication for granted. I was the master of my own craft, exactly where I belonged in my new chapter of life.